everyone, it is Tutorial Dude here with another tutorial. We are going to be doing Premiere Pro CC 2015. So this is the latest edition of Premiere Pro that just came out in the Creative Cloud. And if you don't have that, most of what I'm going to be going over is also pertains to older versions of Premiere Pro, but I would really recommend getting that Creative Cloud license because it's a little bit pricier. Whatever you can argue about the subscription model, but it really is worth it, particularly if you're getting into the creative field. So anyway, I'm going to get started here. Right from the beginning, this is for absolute beginners. This is for people who really maybe you've never edited before. You want to edit something, small, quick, whatever, nothing too major. I do at the end of the video. I'm going to have like a top 10, requested little tricks. So those are maybe for more advanced people who've used Premiere a little bit and they want to know how to do like a quick little trick that'll make editing easier. I've included it in this video because I think once you go through the beginning, it'll be helpful for you to just have a couple of the tricks up your sleeve. So anyway, we're going to get started here. This is, I have just fired up Premiere Pro 2015, part of the Creative Cloud. Here I'm editing on Mac. It'll look pretty similar on a PC. And the first thing it'll ask you to do with a new project is to have a save location for the project file and the name of that. And I have created, this is just how I work as an editor. I have a folder here for this project, and within that I really like to organize everything as much as possible. So I've got numbered folders here for footage. It's going to contain all of the footage that I've brought in. So that's audio, video. I've included FX here because I'm going to have a few little audio effects to use. Then we've got a project files folder. We've got a folder for music. This is some Creative Commons music that I found, and then a folder for exports, and you might have one for graphics, this is better way to just kind of keep things organized. So I've chosen this project files folder for the project, and that's where we're going to store things. The rest of this you really don't need to worry about too much. This is pretty advanced here. This is where stuff is going to get saved. So. All right, here we go. We're going to hit OK, and Creative Cloud is going to create our project. We see there it is already. That's cool. And we'll wait for this to load up here. Alrighty. So as this is loading up here, I want to point out a few things about the interface, and this will make more sense once I bring some footage in, which I'm going to do in a second. But what we have here is a pretty standard. I'm going to get rid of my my dock here too. Man, how do we do that in this version? Can I forget how to get rid of the dock now. You know what? We're going to deal with it. The dock is just going to be down there. Usually I like to hide that, but this is an account I use just for these. So anyway, we're going to bring some footage in here. This is the default view. You can really order this around in any way you want to, though I recommend kind of keeping it relatively similar to this. What we're going to have over here, this is where all of our media is going to live. This is going to be what's known as the source monitor up here. This is the program monitor here, and this is our timeline. So to have this stuff make a little bit more sense to us, I'm going to import media, and there's a couple of ways that we can do this. The first is obviously you can go down here, and if you double click, it'll bring up your the typical Finder import window, and you can select footage this way. And I'm going to select the entire video folder that I have here. We're going to hit import, and here we go. It's going to bring this stuff in. Now the thing we'll notice with Premiere is that, and I do apologize for the cough drop. I'm coming off a little bit of a cold, and I really wanted to get this tutorial done. So typically I don't do this, but I hope you'll bear with me. So here I've imported this entire video folder because I do want to have the entire folder with video in it. So here we have these. And the thing that Premiere will do is it conforms. You'll see this thing sometimes, and if you're importing a lot of footage, it'll be maybe a little frustrating because there's a lot of conforming that it needs to do, and that's basically it's going through the video and it's creating reference files for all of the audio in the video so that you can relatively quickly edit later. The really nice thing about Premiere, since I think CS6, is that you can pretty much edit any video no matter what codec you're using, however it was encoded natively. That means you don't need to do anything to the video. The video doesn't need to be rendered. You can just edit immediately, which is great, but because of that, there's a little bit of work that sometimes needs to happen in the beginning, and it usually does happen in the background. If you've got a faster computer, it won't really matter. If you've got a slower computer, it'll probably affect it a little bit. So we've now got our video, and I did that by double-clicking here. I'll show you another method. That is, if you go to Finder, and you now go to... let's see, I've got effects here. So I can now drag this from Finder. Try that again here. I'm gonna drag this from Finder into this, and it'll highlight. And there it is. That's another way to do it. And then, of course, there is, if you right-click here, you can go to Import. That's also available from the File menu. And the last thing I'm going to import is our music. So now I've got all of our folders. Premiere calls them bins. That's fine. And then I'm going to create one last bin here, folder, and I'm going to call it sequences. And I always like to put a little asterisk here because that forces it always to the top. And that means it's always going to be right up top, which is where I want it. So I'm going to show you a little bit about the interface, and then I'm going to go into the basics of setting up an edit here. So I've got this footage here. This is footage I shot a couple years ago during the first snow here in this area. So it's kind of lovely little ethereal kind of atmospheric shots. So if I double click on video down here, it's going to load it up in the source monitor, and that'll come right up here as soon as it's ready, and there we see it. And the source monitor is really where you can almost think of it as like your preview monitor, or where you're going to be previewing footage. It's where you can kind of like watch all of the footage that's kind of like in your storage, where you're waiting for stuff to be edited. This is where you can kind of preview everything essentially. And your program monitor is where you're going to watch stuff that's actually in what is known as the timeline, and the timeline really is the crux of editing, and that's the sequence that's going to actually be your edit. So let's go ahead and create a sequence. We can do that a couple different ways. The easiest way is to click this little thing down here, new item. We go to sequence, and here it's going to give us this window which prompts us for what kind of sequence we want to create. Now, we can actually go through here, and I know that I shot this with a digital SLR, DSLR at 1080p 25. I'm not going to go over a lot of the video basics in this tutorial. I'm going to say that for another tutorial. I'm going to assume that you know a bit about footage and how it was shot and frame rates and codecs and all that stuff. I'm just going to go into Premiere here. So I do know that this is 1080p 25 footage shot with that this preset will work for my footage. But I just want to show you guys something that really cool that Premiere will do. I'm going to choose DV here, and I'm just going to create a rough edit sequence here. And there we see our sequence, and now we can see the timeline pane pop up with what we would like to see. Now, if I drag the video over to the timeline now, we get this little prompt, clip mismatch warning, right? And this is a really cool thing that Adobe Premiere does, where it basically says, hey, this clip isn't gonna match what the sequence is set to. And sometimes maybe you want to do that if you've got like a 1080p sequence, a timeline, but you're bringing in some footage that's maybe like 480, it was shot lower resolution, and you know that's going to happen, and you're just going to scale it up, so you don't necessarily want to change it. But in this case, what it allows us to do is just create the sequence really quickly, and then know if I hit change sequence settings, it's going to automatically change that sequence to match the footage. And that's a really cool way to just like not have to worry about when you're creating a sequence exactly putting the right settings in there. So I'm going to just get rid of this right now. So now we know our sequence settings are correct. Now we can kind of see the timeline. And the way the timeline is broken down is you've got video layers and audio layers down here, and they're separated by this little bar, and you can drag this around if you want to see more video and more audio. And it works in much the same way if you know Photoshop or anything like that. Things that are higher up are going to be visible in priority versus stuff that's lower down. So anything that is on the bottom, if there's video on top of it, you're not going to necessarily see that. But we'll get into more of that later. So what we have here now, if I were to drag this back in here just to see, we see now that pops up in the program monitor. Program is referring to everything that's down in our timeline. So this is how we can see stuff in our timeline, and the source monitor is how we can kind of preview anything really that we want to. So in this case, there's a couple of different ways that we can get started. Clearly, you could just drag all your footage. I can select it all and just drag it in here, and I'll just plop it all down. And this is one of those cases where it's like really personal preference how you want to get started with what's known as your rough cut or your rough edit, which is really your first pass. Some editors like to do what's called a string out, which is really just a sequence. It's more or less what I've done here, is a sequence of all of the footage. And then you just go through all of that, and it's a way to kind of watch it all at once really quickly. And you kind of select stuff from your string out sequence and put that maybe in a sequence called selects, right? And that's like all the footage that you know is really nice, and then you copy that into a rough edit sequence. The other way that a lot of people do it is they watch their footage from over here, and they'll watch through it, and they'll find, maybe in this case, of course, I don't have multiple takes, but they find the point where they really like stuff, and they'll hit, they'll make an in point here. This is where they want the video to start. So I'm going to hit I. You can also hit this mark in here, and then you go to where you want it to end, and you hit out or O, or you hit this little button here. And now you can just drag this, and it's just going to put between those 2 points, it's just going to put that down on the timeline. And now if we play through, we see just that point right there. It's a little stuttery because I've got a lot going on this computer right now. So cool. All right, so that's one thing. So basically, there's a couple different ways that you can edit that. Of course, I'm going to go into more details of kind of the some tricks at the end of this video. Like I mentioned, there's a thing called subclips that you can use, and that works really well in terms of figuring out what clips you're going to use. I want to get right into like the basics of editing here. Technically, of course, I'm not going to go into details of exactly how one edits creatively. I think there is a lot of stuff out there. Maybe I'll do a tutorial about that at some point. Basically, some of the tricks about how creatively to do editing, but this is really just a technical level. So I am just going to take this clip, even though I got rid of it, I'm going to put it in. We've got this guy walking. We'll see what else we have here. We've got more people walking down here. Now, if I play through this is a good example. We can see that when I was shooting this, I was trying to get the shot ready, and I didn't really quite have it ready until right about there. So I'm going to wait until right there. Now I've got my in point. This is where I want to get started, and we'll let it play till about there. Mark my out point, drag it down. There are keyboard shortcuts that you can use for a lot of this stuff. Again, that's getting into more advanced, complicated stuff, so I'm not going to get into that right now. Drag and drop works pretty easily. If you are going to be really getting into editing, I would recommend you learn the keyboard shortcuts because that stuff really helps you be a quick editor, and speed is really important when you're editing. Just like learning how to type really quickly is important for a writer so you can get your ideas down. Knowing keyboard shortcuts is really helpful when you're editing so you can get stuff done as quickly as possible. So here we have some footage of a bunch of kids sledding, and then the same thing, I kind of want to wait until I have a nice shot. Oh, there we go. That's kind of the shot that I want now. So we're going to wait until I think these people are going to start sledding. I missed that shot. Okay, well, nonetheless, we're going to get this guy as soon as it's stabilize the shot. There we go. We're going to come in from here. We're going to let that play out. And we'll stop it right there. And I'll drop this in. And then lastly, we've got a shot of the street outside too. And I think this is also the case where I was getting focused and moving around. So we'll wait. I also really want to get that shot where the cars are. Yeah, so right there. And we'll leave it at that. Again, there is not a lot of story going on here at all. This is just a collection of shots. I'm just trying to show you the basics. So I've now laid those all out on the timeline here. You can see those. You can see the video is here and the audio is here. Now there's a couple different things that I want to go over in the timeline just to familiarize all of you with what's going on here. Up here you can see the time, the length of time, and you can see it's like almost 4.5 minutes long here, and clearly that's way too long for what we need. We're just looking at so much stuff over here. It's really kind of unnecessary. So there's a couple ways we can zoom in so we can really just concentrate on what we want here. And the first is by dragging down here. If you drag out, you're going to see more stuff. If you drag in, you're just going to see the clips that you want. The other method is command or control minus and plus. That's pretty standard zoom, right? And if we come in there now, so and I should point out, of course, that a lot of these keyboard keyboard shortcuts are changeable. I'm going to go over that at the end of the video too. So maybe some of the keyboard shortcuts I'm going over aren't really the ones that you guys have. That's part of the reason why I don't want to go over keyboard shortcuts, is I've really set Adobe Premiere up for the way that I like to edit, and so it doesn't really make a lot of sense for me to impart my keyboard shortcuts on you. You should just be using the ones that you want to use. So now we've kind of got the 4 clips that we want really filling our frame. This allows us to really concentrate on what we want to edit. Now let's say you want to see previews of what's on your timeline here. If we just hold and drag our click wheel or scroll wheel, whatever, over this area of the layer, it'll expand that to the point where we can kind of see a thumbnail of everything, right? And then the same thing goes for audio, right? And as we get there, we can see the waveform now of the audio, and this is really, really helpful, particularly when you're editing a lot of stuff with dialogue. You can see exactly where things are, and it helps you make more precise edits. So we've now got our shots on our timeline. We're a little familiar with the timeline. And I'm going to go over a couple of tips for editing now that we've got stuff on the timeline. So I've kind of roughly edited in and out points for these clips. And of course for these, really doesn't matter too much because these are totally arbitrary clips. There's not a lot of stuff going on. But if you're like editing dialogue or even just shots back and forth between characters, it is pretty important to have very precise edits. So and those are important when they're matched up against one another. So if I go to some area here and I let this play through and I say, you know what, actually I want to come into this shot a little later. I want to make a cut here, right? I want to make an edit here. We can go to edit, we go to sequence. See, I never use this stuff up here, so I don't even know where it is now. Well, all right, you know what? I'm gonna go this way. Over here we have our toolbar, and we want to go to the razor tool, right? And in this case, razor tools also, if you hit C, you also get to the razor tool. And now we get this, you see the mouse cursor has changed to this razor. It's got the red dash through it because there's nothing for it to cut right now. But if I go over the video and I click, it's now made a cut. Now in this case, because the audio and the video were linked together, they were shot together, Premiere automatically links them and it automatically keeps them linked, right? So that's really convenient for us at right now because we want to make a cut through both of these. Now, if I hit delete, it goes away, right? But I'm left with this gap. And what I can do is of course, I can drag all of these and then I can, or select all of these by dragging across them, and then I can drag it to close that, right? Or what I can do is I can use this, what they call track select forward tool, and that is going to, you see these arrows here, it's going to select everything from the point I'm clicking forward or to the right here, and see, it does the same thing, and now I can click and drag once again. And then there's also going in the other direction, so if we wanted to do this, it's basically the same thing but going in the other direction. Or the final thing we could do if we've already made this cut is we can select that blank area between the clips and then hit delete, and it ripple deletes it, brings it forward. But the easiest way to do this, if you know that all you want to do is close this gap, is you hit Command or Control Delete, and that all right, keyboard shortcuts aren't what I'm expecting. We're just going to go to, we right click and then we go to ripple delete. That's what we want. And that deletes it and brings everything forward. It closes that gap. So that's a really convenient thing for us to find out. That is really the most basic edit tool, right? Is that cut, is that razor tool. We're going to be making lots of cuts. That's what editing is. It's cutting up the video. So, then we've also learned about the track forward and track backwards tools. Then the other thing I want to show you is the rolling edit, and that is this little icon here. You can also get to it by hitting N in this case, and this is these two arrows pointing in either direction. And what this lets us do is, let's say we're at a point, and this is really helpful when you're doing dialogue or match shots, when you've got two shots that are maybe shot from two different cameras looking at the same thing, and so the time is exactly the same. You don't have to worry about there being a difference in the time between them. They're running along the same timeline or along the same time, and we want to shift and edit backwards or forwards. We want to roll where the edit is in time. What we can do is we can use this. We click along the edit point, along the cut point, and now we can drag backwards or forwards, and what that does is it's essentially the equivalent of moving the clip to the right, in this case, forward, and the clip to the left to match it. So it's basically taking two steps with one step. It's killing two birds with one stone. It's moving one to the right and the other one following it, so that it really kind of helps us in that regard. So if we play through this now, we see this clip ends earlier, the other one starts earlier. Then one other quick little thing I want to show you is this thing up here is known as snapping, and you can toggle that on and off by hitting S in this case, or clicking here. And what snapping does is it's pretty convenient most of the time, because it'll let you, if I have snapping on, and let's say I'm dragging in this case, and I want this clip to end earlier, and I can do that. I'm just in the standard selection mode here, and if I go and hover over the edit point here, I get until it looks like this, and then I click and drag, and you see I'm kind of dragging, and then at a certain point, when it gets close to our marker, or where it shows where we are in the playhead, that thin blue line, it snaps right to it, and that's really convenient if we know that's exactly where we want to go. We don't have to be imprecise about anything. It's very precise. There are a lot of times where you don't want that. You want to be able to, look, right now I'm trying to drag in between and it won't let me. It's trying to snap to that. So I can toggle snapping off, and then I've got more freedom to get exactly where I want to get manually. It's like the equivalent of like autopilot and flying manually. So those are a couple of really basic things about the timeline. One thing I forgot to point out in the interface, of course, is that your audio monitors are here. It shows you the audio levels that we see, and now we're going to get to these cars way up. Oh, so loud, especially that stupid car with the squeaking wheels. So the other thing we can do right in the timeline here is once we've expanded the audio layer really wide, excuse me, sorry, we have these lines here, and these are the volume lines. This shows us where the volume is. And in this case, if I click down and drag, you see it's got this negative at this point dB, and dB refers to decibels. It's how loud it is. And if I drag this down, I can make that whole thing quieter. It's not going to affect the waveform. It's just going to affect the output of it. In this case, I'm going to bring it down, right about 11. If we play through this now, we'll hear it's much quieter. You see how much lower down it is over here. And we can see that something has been done to this track because it's got a little yellow over the effects. I'm going to go over effects in a little bit, but just so you know, this is an easy way to just be able to look at your timeline and say, oh, this audio track has some effects on it because it's yellow here. The next thing that I want to go over is transitions. And transitions is just literally the transition between two clips. Of course, in this case, all we've got are a bunch of cuts, and that, I would say, for the majority of things that you want to do is what you want. You really just want cuts. But let's say that you want to do a transition, like a fade, for example, is a crossfade is probably the most common other kind of cut. What we can do, there's a couple different methods. The first thing I'll just show you is if you select that transition point, that area between two, and you can see that it's red here, and so I know that I've selected that. Now, if I go to sequence, we can apply video transition, and this is the default video transition, and the default is a crossfade. So if I do that, we can see here now that this cross dissolve, a crossfade, a little icon has been put over the timeline, and that represents exactly where the crossfade is going to be starting and where it ends, right? And so we can see, if we play through, we see the effects of that cross dissolve. As I play through this, right? So one thing that we can do here is we can literally, if I'm in a regular selection tool, if I am just hovering over one end or the other of the cross dissolve icon, I can actually change the length of that. So here I come. Okay, I can't make it longer because this clip here, actually, there isn't enough information there. So that's actually a good thing to know, is if you don't have more video, the video doesn't go further, you can't make the cross dissolve longer. But I could, in this case, make it shorter. You see how that works. And this is happening symmetrically now. If I don't want it to happen symmetrically, what I can do is I can select it here. Oops. And go up to, this is again the problem of, oops, not having my own keyboard shortcuts. There we go. If I double click on the transition there, that area right there where the red is, I've now got on one side one end of the transition, on the other side of the transition, and I can change the one side or the other of that transition. If I double click on the transition icon, I can change manually the duration of it. So let's say I want to get it exactly to 1 second. I can do that, and now it's shortened it to 1 second. And we can just play through that, and we have the transition there. Now, the one thing you notice, though, is that the audio didn't have the same thing. So we can do the same thing there, and I'm going to show you the other method for getting to transitions by doing this. You could also, of course, select, we've got that selected down there, and we can go to apply audio transition. It'll do the same thing. It'll do a cross dissolve between the audio, but I'm going to show you, if you go over here in your library pane or your media pane, you can go to effects, and here we don't just have effects, but we have transitions, and we're going to go to audio transitions in this case because we want to get an audio transition, but of course you would go to video transitions if you want one of the other video transitions. And really the only thing under here is audio transitions. And the default one is constant power. That is what I would recommend. If you don't know the differences between them, really doesn't matter. So they're pretty subtle. And what I'm going to do is I grab that and I drag it and I drop it right over this. And look, now we've got a audio transition as well. And if we play through this, we hear that transition is a lot smoother now, and that's really a lot more pleasing to the ears when you're watching something. One of the little tricks of the trade for editors, if you're just doing really quick and dirty. Of course, if you're going through even a short film or anything that's going to go through a lot of post-production, maybe it's going to an audio mixer after you're done with the edit, blah, blah, blah. This stuff doesn't necessarily matter because that'll be smoothed out afterwards. But if you're doing something really quick and dirty for YouTube, let's say, you can apply a audio transition to something just a point between two clips where maybe the audio levels are just slightly off. There's a little background something, or you hear because the way you're editing, maybe there's a little click between edits, and it's really noticeable. If you apply a really short transition, even like 3 seconds or 3 milliseconds, it'll smooth that out, and it'll make it a lot less jarring for people when they're listening. And that's just a little trick of the trade that I'll throw in right there instead of at the end. Okay, we're going to move on now to adding some other things to our edit here. And I do just want to point out, this is maybe getting a little bit more complicated, but there are other video transitions. So if you're trying to go for some of those looks, where there's a page peel is a great example, or like a page turn. If we do this, we just drag this over here. Try that again. It's got that silly effect, which you see like on, public access or something like that. Really silly effect. And you see, this is actually a good point. It's maybe a little advanced, but just to show you, all of this is yellow because it's footage that Adobe Premiere can kind of render on the fly without big issues with your CPU or your GPU. The red means that really this stuff needs to be rendered to be handled properly, and the way that you can do that is just by handing Command R, Control R, or going to Sequence, Render Effects into Out, or Render into Out, and that'll make stuff in this area play a lot smoother. Like in this case, it's just going to be really choppy. And one thing I should point out really quick is over down here in the program monitor, if you select here, this is going to be the resolution that it plays back at. If you have maybe a little older computer and you're using a really new camera with that's shooting footage that's really high resolution, I would recommend you drop this down to 1/4, and that means while you're playing, the footage is going to probably look like really pixelated, like you can see here. If you're watching this at high resolution on YouTube, you can see the change all of a sudden. And all that means is it's using less RAM and CPU. It's using less power on your computer, which makes it a lot easier to play through stuff without having choppiness, which is frankly more important when you're editing than having everything be like crystal sharp in terms of resolution when you're doing your edit. But if you do want to watch through something with full, you bring it back up to full. We're going to keep it down to 1/4 because I think it'll be helpful for a computer right now. It has to do a lot of stuff. So we're going to move on to a couple other things we want to do to our video to kind of make it complete, right? I'm going to get rid of this page turn. We don't really need it. One thing that we can do, rather than just jumping straight into, boom, there's now video, we can do a dissolve in, but we do that at the beginning. If you do this to any video or audio that doesn't have something on the other end of it, the dissolve is just going to be from black or to black. So if I do this, if I do a cross dissolve here, we see we're dissolving in from black. which is kind of nice. And I want to do the same thing to audio. And now we've dissolved in, and let's do the same thing to the end. We're dissolving out. So now, what are a couple things that we want to do to a typical video? We want to add titles, and we want to add some music. And I have a couple of little audio things that I want to add just to show you some layering. And so let's start with titles. Adobe Premiere has titles built into it. We'll go up to the title menu and new title, and in this case we're just going to do a still. You can do a roll, which is the typical credit roll like you see at the end of a movie where it's coming from the bottom and rolling through the top. Or we can do a crawl, which is like what you would see like on a news channel at the bottom, where it's like crawling horizontally. It's scrolling horizontally, going from left to right, or from right to left rather. But we're going to just do a default still just for our title, and we'll call this title for the project, whatever. It doesn't really, this is more for you, for your own sake, so it doesn't really matter what we call it. And I'm going to create a bin just for my own sake called graphics, and we're going to drag it in there. And now you see when I've created this title, I get the title pane that comes up, and it's got a little few subpanes in it. The first thing we see is a preview of the video where the playhead is. So if I change here, it's going to change up here too. We do want it to be right here. And so what we do is we already have the text is selected. We're going to click down, and that gives us our text box to get started. And we're going to call this first snow. Oops, that's not what that should say. First snow. Okay, and then if I select the arrow here, the selection tool, I can make it bigger just by dragging. Oops. Or I can also font size. I can increase the font size here. You see, we want to make it nice and big. So I could also do that by dragging here. If I hit down Shift, it's going to increase it uniformly rather than just if I don't hit down Shift and I drag, I could potentially be making it like taller or wider, and I don't really want that. So hold down Shift and drag, and it'll make it uniformly bigger. And we'll put it right down here. Now you see, because I'm using white here, it doesn't really show up too well against the white of the snow. But at the same time, if I choose black, it'll kind of get lost as well. And I chose black by going to color here, right? The fill color refers to the fill of the text. I'm going over this stuff a little quickly here because I really just want to get down to the basics of this stuff and not necessarily details of all the tiny little things. So really the best way to familiarize yourself with all the different stuff that you can use here is just by playing around with it and seeing like, oh, what happens when I add a stroke or texture or whatever. So in this case, the fill color refers to the color of the text. I want to bring it back to white, because what I'm going to do is just add a little bit of drop shadow to it. Right, and here we have this shadow, and it's not selected. I'm going to select it, and we see it comes up a little bit, and you can change the angle. If I scroll down, you get this little wheel, which when I rotate it, it changes the angle of the shadow. I'm going to keep it there. Opacity refers to, if you don't know what opacity is, refers to how visible it is. So 50% opacity means it's like 50% visible or solid. So if I bring this up, we see it gets darker. If I bring it down, it disappears. We're going to make it a little bit darker. And we can see it's pretty tight to the text, and that's okay, but I actually do want to bring it out a little bit. All right, and spread refers to how how dissipated that shadow is, and I want to bring that up a little bit too. I don't want it to be so hard. There we go. That looks pretty good. And clearly, I'm just you can use any fonts you want to, any fonts you have on your computer. If you have a Creative Cloud account, you can get Adobe Font Kit and get fonts straight through Adobe. There's all sorts of stuff down here. They've got built-in styles that include not just the text, but outlines and shadows and all sorts of stuff. If you just want a one-click thing, experiment with those yourself. The other really handy thing, the last thing I'll show you, is it's got this centering, automatic centering stuff. So we can automatically center it horizontally by clicking this. I already had it, so it didn't even move. But if we want to center it vertically too, if I click this, you see it moves it right to the middle. I actually don't want it there. I like it down below. I want it to be more in the path. So I'm going to bring it back down here. Man, that's pretty good. I like that. I like the way that title looks now. For this anyway. So I'm going to close that, and now I've got my title here, and it's treated just like any other video. I can just drag that straight onto my timeline, and of course I'm going to drag it onto another layer, and I want to drag it onto a layer that is above my video layer, because that way I'll be able to see the video underneath the text, the title. And so that's exactly what we see here. And we also see that the cross dissolve will come in, and then all of a sudden right at that point, boom, that's where the title starts, and here it ends. I'm going to drag the title so it's longer, and you see here's a great example of snapping. Because my playhead is not actually exactly on the transition, it'll either snap to the playhead or it'll snap to the edit point there, which is not actually, there we go. Now it's going to end the title and that video at the same time, which is a nice clean way to get rid of the title. And if I want, I could drag this all the way to the beginning, and so when the video starts, we see first snow, and then the video comes up with it. Or if I want, I could also put the same cross dissolve on that title, and now everything fades up together. Now, just to show you what I mean about the ordering of layers, if I were to drag this video above the title, just like this, just temporarily, the title disappears because this video is above this, so we see this before we see this, and there's no areas of this video that are kind of masked out or cut out to see what's below it. Whereas when, if I bring this back down here, we see the title, it only includes the text, and Adobe Premiere does this for us automatically, so anything other than the text shows through, and that's why we get that nice title. So we're gonna move ahead with this. And nice, I like the way that is. And we could put credits at the end too. So there we've got titles, and then of course we want, let's say, some music for our video. And sorry, I want to go to music. This is a Creative Commons music from Incompetech.com. A guy named Kevin MacLeod, who has some really great, amazing library of Creative Commons music for you to use, and all you need to do is credit him in your video, which clearly I will do at the end of this tutorial and in the description. I would recommend checking him out. So I have this song here. This is going to be another example of, I want to actually load this video up, and we see in the waveform that the audio doesn't actually start, the song doesn't actually start until this point in that file, and I don't want those 2 seconds of silence at the beginning, so I'm going to hit I or here to make the in point, and if we play from this point, we hear this music, nice solemn little music here, and I could just drag this down. Oops, we want to drag by using this, clicking down on this waveform. And I could just drag this down here, but it's going to be really long, because we've only got 15-20 seconds of video, and this track is 3 minutes long. So I could just do that and then come over here and use my razor tool to cut it, and then delete this, right? That is certainly one way you can do it. Or if you're only going to be using a few seconds of it, we could just come right over here to, let's say, the 15-second or 20-second mark right around here, and we hit O, just so we have less to be worrying about. And now I can just kind of drag this right over here, right? And I can expand this the same way I did the other ones by just dragging my click wheel, and here now we see our music. I've put the music on the third audio track because I know I'm going to be adding a few audio effects. So I want to keep that closer to just the way I like to organize. I like to keep it closer to the other video. So now if I hit play, we hear not only the audio of the video, but also the music playing underneath. The music really gives kind of a solemn feel to all this footage, and I like that. It's a little loud to me. The music is a little present, so what I can do is I can go to this volume thing and I can just drag it down a little bit. I can also, this is getting into a little advanced territory, but nonetheless, if I have this and I double click it, it's now going to load the part of the clip, the exact clip that's in the timeline, into my source monitor. And I can do that for anything. I can do that for video here or audio. And what the difference between doing this, double clicking something in your timeline and loading it into your source monitor versus the same exact footage, the same reference to the footage in your media pane here, is that what is now in the source monitor is a direct reference to what is in your timeline. So for example here, I've loaded up this clip and we can see it's gray here because there are in and out points marked, because this is exactly the footage that is in our timeline. So if I were to move this forward, let's say, and then I can either, if I hover over here and I get this marker and I drag, or I change by hitting mark in or I here, and I change the in point, watch what happens down on the timeline. It also changes it in the timeline. So this is another way to kind of get like really refined edits. The reason why I wanted to show you what happens when you bring this stuff up into the source monitor is because the other thing that happens, we're going to load up that audio again, and you see the same thing happens. Here we've got selected exactly what is down in our timeline. We have this pane up here called Effect Controls, and if we go to Effect Controls, there are a couple of default effects that every clip, audio or video, kind of come prepared with, and of course with audio one of those is just volume. So rather than hovering over this line here by expanding this and dragging this kind of manually, doing it kind of graphically so to speak, we can go to Effect Controls and we can drag, or really we can click on this, right? We click on that and then I can type in, I want it to be, let's say -8 dB, hit enter, and now we have got the audio level, and you saw that line moves down 2 to represent that. And now if I hit play down here, I want to click down here and hit play, right? And I'm sorry, one thing I didn't realize, I didn't tell you guys, spacebar hits play. Spacebar is play. You can hit play here, it does the same thing. Now you hear the audio is a little bit quieter. And that's nice, I like that. So we're gonna hit stop by hitting spacebar again. And we're going to bring this back over to here. And the final thing that I want to do is I have some audio effects, some other audio. And this could be anything that you have. This could be, maybe it's voiceover for your project or anything at all, and you want to lay it in. So in this case, I have some sound effects of someone walking in snow, just to kind of add to that, because I don't actually have it with this first guy. So that's good enough. I'm just going to, just for now, so I don't have too much to work with, I'm going to take the first 5 seconds. I'm going to drag it down to here. And just so I can see the waveform again, I'm going to shorten this. I'm going to expand this. So now if I play through, it's not really in sync, of course, though, because the audio I have is way slower than the way that this guy is walking. And I'm going to save this because I'm going to show you how to manipulate time at the end of this tutorial. And so I'll show you how we'll actually add this in later. So for now, I'm actually going to get rid of this because it doesn't really look right. But the other effect that I have is the sound of kids sledding. And we do actually have a little bit of this already in the audio. But let's say, like, I don't really like that. I want to have my own, like pre-made audio of the sound of kids sledding. All right, So we've got this, made my in and out points. I'm going to drag it, same thing, to this area. Oh, it's way too much, so I can actually roll this back. Now I can do a couple things here. If I want to keep both, obviously, I can just play now. Now we're going to get both the real audio and my sound effect. But in this case, I don't actually want that. I want just the sound effect library clip that I have. These are just Apple loops that I'm using, by the way. So there's a couple ways we can do about this. The first is kind of what I would call destructively, which is I could, rather than having dragged that down there, I could simply drag it and replace it this way. That's not the best way to do it because we can see this is too long. It's a little imprecise. So bring it down here, bring it to exactly the same length as the clip above it by dragging, and then just drag up over this. And now we see we've replaced the audio there. We would need to redo our cross dissolve. Do that. Oops. Oh, is that 'cause? Okay. There we go. So if we play this now, that's our other, it's our sound effect audio. Now the last way I'm going to show you that we can do this is we roll this back to here, and we can enable or disable certain parts of a track, and this allows us to be undestructive. It means we can keep the old audio in place in case we ever want it for reference, or maybe we do want to use it later. And the way we do that is the first thing we need to do is if I do this now, and it's called enabling or disabling. So this is enabled right now. If I hit this, it disables it, but because the audio and video were linked here, it's disabled both. So in this case, I'm going to undo that. That's Command Z. I'm going to select this as selected. I can either hit Command or Control L, or I can go here and I can hit unlink. That's going to unlink these two. So now I can select them separately. And now I'm going to go and hit right click, hit enable, and it's just disabled the audio of the from the video, and I'm gonna just be left with the audio of my sound effect. And that's cool. I like that. I'm happy with that now. So I've got basically, you know, really this is nothing. This is just an example to show you guys, but I've got something now. Let's say my video is finished. Now I want to export it. Okay, so this is the final step here, right? And this is outputting or exporting. So what we can do, we can get to this a couple different ways. We have our sequence selected here. We know it is because this is highlighted in blue. We can also select the sequence here. Either way, it does the same thing. And we go up to File, Export, Media. And we can also do that. In this case, the keyboard shortcut is Command, or if you're using a PC, Control M. Again, these keyboard shortcuts change, so it's not really reliable. Anyway, so we're going to hit Media, or Export rather, and we get our Export Settings dialog box. And here there's a couple of different things we see. And I'm not gonna go through a whole lot of this because this can be something really complicated. But let's just say, like, you know, so many people, we want to bring it to YouTube. This is going to go to YouTube. So Premiere has made this really easy for us. My first thing we're going to do is we're going to select what format we want to export to, and in this case it's H.264. That is a type of codec, it's a type of encoding. And now we've got a couple different presets to choose from. If you're like sending this to someone for reference, you could do match source and medium bit rate. Or if you want just a really high quality file, you can do high bit rate. In our case, and then you see all these different presets if you're trying to send it to an Android phone or a tablet or an Apple TV or iPad, all this different stuff here, even the Nook But in our case, we want to go to YouTube. So I'm going to select the YouTube 1080p HD preset. You can also go to Vimeo here if you want to. I know that my footage is 1080, so I'm going to output at 1080. And I select this, and pretty much everything that I would want is selected automatically. We'll go through a few of these just so you understand what's going on. Our width and height are 1920 by 1080. That is exactly what it was in the source, so that's great. And here, the MPEG-4, the H.264 profile is high and level is 4.2. I doubt you'll know what those mean, but that's pretty standard for what YouTube wants. And then here we see the bitrate settings. This refers to how the quality of the output, and it's 16 and 16. So the target that it's trying to aim for is 16 megabits per second, and the maximum that it'll ever reach is 16. And that is going to be good enough for the foreseeable future on YouTube. So this is a good preset to be using. If you want like a really high quality file just to future-proof yourself, however you want, because YouTube, what they do is they keep your source video, and anytime, in another year or two, computers can handle better, and internet connections can handle better quality, they'll actually go and all the really popular videos that are still getting lots of views, they get automatically in the background, like you don't even have to do anything. They get re-encoded for playback at a higher level if that source file exists. So you could go much higher if you wanted to, but I think you're fine with 16 and 16. Then if you go to audio, in this case they're doing AAC audio at 48 kilohertz, 48,000 hertz, and a bit rate of 320. Again, you don't need to worry about what this is. Just this preset is really it's a great preset for doing this kind of work. So if I click here on the output name, I can change the output name and where it's going, and I actually want to put it, if we go, I'd select down here, I want to put it in my exports folder. I don't like it when it hides the extension, and I'm just gonna, I like to title mine a little bit more specifically. First Snow Rough Edit, and I always like to put a date on, but we don't need to do that right now. I'll hit save here, and just so you guys know, sometimes what will happen is if you've chosen in and out points in your sequence, maybe you won't see, you'll wonder, why am I not seeing my entire project up here? It's because there's in and out points in your sequence, and the default range of what it's going to export is called sequence in out. If you just want to make sure that your entire timeline, your entire sequence gets exported, you go to entire sequence here, you'll know that your entire project will get exported. So there's two options that you have for actually exporting. The default selected is Q, and then there's this other export option. Hitting just plain export is going to have Adobe Premiere, the instance or the actual application that's open right now, export it. And it's just going to use one processor on your computer, and it'll probably take a really long time because it's only using one processor. If we hit Q, it's going to send all of this information to a program called Adobe Media Encoder that's included with the Creative Suite. So that's what we're going to do in this case, because the benefit of using Adobe Media Encoder is that Media Encoder will use as many processors as possible available to it to do your rendering. So the rendering goes a lot quicker. If you've got, let's say, like an 8-core, 16-core computer, so like essentially 16 different processors, it'll use way more than just one or two of them, depending on what Premiere is using. And the other benefit to it is that once Media Encoder is activated and it starts encoding, it uses a background instance of Premiere, which means that you don't need to have Premiere open anymore, or you could start working on something else while it's encoding. That'll, of course, use some system resources, so you may not be able to do too much, but it does allow you to kind of keep working while the encoding is happening essentially in the background. So it's just taking a little while because it's the first time that I'm opening it up on this particular account. But It's just kind of cranking away in the background, and just wait for this to happen here. And I should also say, so coming up right after this will be this top 10 things that people want to see, you know, like tricks of the trade for Premiere Pro. That's coming up like right at the end of this. But if there's anything else you guys want to know, sorry, hold on a second. About Premiere, some little questions. How do I do this one little thing? We don't need to get too advanced because some stuff is really complicated, but write in the comments, just let me know what you'd like to see, and I can see about cooking up another tutorial for this stuff. So here we see Media Encoder is finally launched, and we see now the Media Encoder interface. Now here we go, we've got our queue of stuff to be encoded, right? And that's the other benefit of using Media Encoder. Let's say you've got a bunch of different sequences or a bunch of different stuff you want to output. You could do what I did before, right? So we go back to Premiere, and we do Command M again to go back to the export menu. Let's just say, for instance, actually, and I'm doing this kind of a really roundabout way because I could do it a different way, that I also want to export one for the Kindle Fire, right? So now I've got this, and now if I hit Q again, it just adds it to the queue. Boom, there it is. So now if I hit encode the start queue thing, it's going to just go through all that stuff without me having to do anything. The other way that I could have done that, of course, I'm going to just delete this, is over here, we've got all those presets that we saw in the export window all over again, laid out a little differently, but nonetheless, there they are. And let's just say, in this case, let's say I want to also export a copy for Vimeo. So here's my Vimeo 1080p HD preset. I can drag this. If it'll let me drag. There we go. Drag this over to here, and it'll create another item in the queue for Vimeo. In this case, it's going to have this _1 here. And I could do this for anything I want to. If I click on the preset here, it'll pop open the same export settings dialog box we saw before, and I can edit stuff again, including one thing I didn't show you before is there's this publish tab here. And this is really cool. It automatically will publish to certain things like YouTube or Vimeo or if you've got a Creative Cloud account. You could do it right there. So now, sorry, excuse me. All we need to do is hit Start Queue, and it'll start rendering this stuff. So if I do that, here we see it's got 2 outputs encoding, and it's just going through and it's doing all the encoding. And I could go to Premiere now, and I could actually close this out, and it's not going to affect the encode at all. So that is the basics from start to finish of editing in Adobe Premiere Pro, just the very beginner basic stuff. As I said, I am going to make my top 10 tricks of the trade for a Premiere Pro. That's gonna actually be a separate tutorial. I'm gonna do that right now, so it'll be uploaded at the same time, and I'm gonna link to it. There's a link for it right here, so you can check that out. That's got all sorts of stuff, including syncing sound separately. If you've recorded, a lot of times people record audio, let's say for a short film, they record that separately. Then you need to get that synced up with your video. I'm going to show you how to do that. I'm going to show you sub clips. I'm going to show you video effects, including color correction. I'm going to show you audio effects, including fixing audio problems, really basic audio problems. I'm going to show you very basic multi-clip, so how to get a multi-clip project set up. That means like you've been shooting multiple cameras at the same time, and how do you edit between those really quickly. I'm going to show you how to mess with time, so either slow stuff down or speed it up, and some basic image stabilization, and maybe a few other things in there too, but that's some cool little tricks that you might want to know. That'll be in the next tutorial. So thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed this, and subscribe to my channel for more tutorials. Going to do all sorts of tutorials coming up. Thanks for watching, everybody.